Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we will be discussing polish prices by volume, but first we will have to talk about my poor computer. It had been acting a little funny for a couple of weeks and then it just would not restart. I couldn't find a BIOS, so I knew it was the chip or the motherboard, and either way, that was bad. I'm pretty sure I bought it in 2013, so I can have zero complaints about the fact that it finally decided to stop working. So, F's in chat for my computer. We have made arrangements for a new one, but it's going to take a couple of weeks, so in the meantime, I'm using my husband's computer. We dug my hard disk out of my old one to put into his so that I could get to my files, so that was nice that I didn't have to start over from scratch. I know my sound is a little bit blown out, but I'm trying to get used to where I should put my microphone in this particular room, and clearly, I don't have the perfect spot yet. But moving on to the actual topic of the video, today we will be looking at 12 milliliter bottles, 11.5, 11, and 10 milliliter bottles. This is a good time to reiterate that I did not choose these brands at random. These are brands I have purchased from in the past, and so I literally have their bottles. This is not an exhaustive list of indie or boutique polishes by any means. And this is today's warning that price does not equal quality. I think we can all think of overpriced nail polish that is certainly not worth the cost. I'm thinking of that red polish in the ice pick bottle. That one comes straight to my mind. I know the nail girlies love it, but good God, that is not for me. Okay, so today we are starting with Garden Path Lacquer, which used to be Lollipop Posse Lacquer. This comes in a 12 milliliter bottle. And when I checked in December, the polishes were all $12.50 or $12.75. And when we put that into the formula, that ends up at 104 per milliliter or 106 per milliliter. So the size of this bottle made a huge difference. Per milliliter, this polish was more expensive than something that was shipped overseas. Next, we're going to look at Emily Damali. It also comes in a 12 milliliter bottle. Their prices are sort of all over the place, if I'm honest. When I looked at them in December, I saw everything from $10, $11, $12, and $13. All of those prices were present. So depending on the cost of the specific bottle, you could be paying 83 cents per milliliter if you bought the $10 bottles. If you bought the $11, you would be spending 92 cents per milliliter. If you bought the $12 bottle, that would be $1 per milliliter. And the $13 bottle would be $1.08 per milliliter. Just like the previous polish, the change in the size of bottle matters quite a bit to how the cost per milliliter has changed. And now for the nail polish that has started this journey, ILNP. And I think they are largely vindicated, which you'll see in just a second. They come in 12 milliliter bottles. They do have two different price points, but they're not split in the way you might think. So unlike other brands, it isn't the difference between specialty finishes and creams and plain jellies. For ILNP, it's every polish is $10, with the exception of magnetics, and all of the magnetics that I could find were $12.50. And when we throw that into the formula, the $10 polishes, which is the vast majority of them, those come out to 83 cents per milliliter. And the magnetics come out to 104 per milliliter. So most of the polishes are quite affordable and a very good price compared to other bottles. The magnetics, those aren't as affordable, and they do line up more with some of our more expensive prices per milliliter. Oh God, now I've got to talk about Holo Taco's bloody prices. So they clearly wanted different price points for different types of polish, but I think they may have gone mad with systemization because there are so many categories, and what goes in each category for me was not intuitive. So if this explanation turns real messy, I didn't do this. I'm just the messenger. So the Holo Taco bottle is 12 milliliters. If you're going to tell me, oh, they overfill them, Christina said that, don't worry, I know, but I have to go with what's on the bottle. I can only go with what they guarantee. As you might have noticed, I have not checked the veracity of the volumes. I did not pour out my nail polish into a container to see how many milliliters it might be. Also, I'm unlikely to do that, so, we're all taking everybody's word for it. So we're going to start with categories of polish that seem unambiguous. To me, looking through their prices, it seems all magnetics are $15. All of their creams seem to be $12 USD. Toppers all seem to be listed as $13. However, this category seems confusing to me because Got Cake is listed as a topper, and I would not have immediately thought that was a topper. And Got Cake is not $13. Make of that what you will. I don't know what to make of it. And their specialty finishes, their flakies, their shimmers, their hollows, i.e. their standalone polishes, those are $14. The site may have changed since December because I had another category that I was going to really struggle to describe, and it doesn't seem to be there anymore, which I found interesting. But also thank God, because that simplifies things a bit. So listing them in order of price, we have creams at $1 per milliliter. The toppers come out to $1.08 per milliliter. Specialty finishes, with the exception of magnetics, are $1.17 per milliliter. And finally, magnetics are $1.25 per milliliter. So Holo Taco is more of a pricey brand. They start at the higher end of what we've looked at previous. They aren't the most expensive thing we'll run across today, but they are certainly not a budget brand. And speaking of those higher prices, we're going to talk about Mooncat now. Another brand with prices that seem to be all over the place. Again, we're going to start with the ones that are unambiguous. Creams are $13. Thermals and magnetics are $16. Their other specialty finishes seem to be mostly $14 or $15. What made any given thing one price or the other, I could not tell you. Their toppers seem to be mostly $13, but I did find Hall of Mirrors, which is $14. So going in order of expense, their creams start at the lowest price point at $1.08 per milliliter. The toppers are mostly $1.08 per milliliter, but they might be more expensive. The specialty finishes that are not thermals or magnetics are $1.17 per milliliter or $1.25 per milliliter. And finally, the thermals and magnetics are $1.33 per milliliter. So, the most expensive thing we have seen so far. However, they are not the most expensive thing you're going to see today. But we are done with the various 12 milliliter bottles, and we will move on to different sizes now. Also, don't worry, there will be a summary of everything from today at the end, and then a summary of both parts after that. So, again, you don't need to remember any of this. There is no pop quiz. Now, if you remember me talking about having to convert from Canadian dollars to USD, we're about to talk about Clionadh Cosmetics. It is a Canadian brand, and because I'm in Canada, it shows me everything in Canadian dollars. Now, from what I saw on my side, their prices ranged from $12.99 Canadian to $16.99 Canadian, which I have translated to be $9.25 USD to $12 USD. But I wasn't sure if those in the US could order directly from the Clionadh site. So I also went and looked at a stockist page, which happened to be Color for Nails. And there, everything was a straight $14 USD. So there was a bit of a markup for being on a stockist page. But certainly if you're Canadian, it is much better to just order from Clionadh directly. Clionadh does offer a single polish that is out of this price range, but it has real gold flakes in it, so I consider it an anomaly, and I'm going to ignore it for our purposes right now. Clionadh does offer some creams, and they do offer them at the $12.99 price point. Also, Clionadh has a very unusual bottle size of 11.5 milliliters. So when we do our calculation, the creams from Color for Nails end up as $1.22 per milliliter. Creams purchased directly from Clionadh's website are 80 cents per milliliter. And the specialty finishes range in price from 87 cents per milliliter to $1.04 per milliliter. Also keep in mind that the exchange rate changes on a daily basis, so the exchange rate in December might have been slightly different. I did my best, but it may still be inaccurate. Okay, we are going to change bottle size again down to 11 milliliters. This took me a bit by surprise because I thought Cirque bottles were 12 milliliters, but they are not. They are 11. Cirque also has variable prices for different items, and there do seem to be some exceptions to these rules, but I will mention them. Plain jellies and creams seem to be $12.50 pretty consistently. Their thermals are $16.50. Many of their specialty finishes are $14.50, but there were a few exceptions that were only $12.50. There was not a lot of consistency in their topper prices. Some were $12.50, some were $14.50. And then Cirque seems to have a few weird outliers. They have a couple of gold toppers that are extremely expensive, one of which is now sold out, so I can't tell the price. The AU polish topper is, I believe, $48 USD. And I believe their polish coronation sells for more than their other polishes, but it is also currently sold out, so I could not tell you that price either. But because I ignored the gold flake polish of Clionadh, I'm going to ignore those outliers here as well. So when we apply our formula, I found the creams and plain jellies are $1.14 per milliliter. And that is pretty expensive compared to creams and jellies from other brands that we've looked at. Even Mooncat. So if you think of Mooncat as an expensive brand, for creams at least, Mooncat is a better option in terms of price. Now, as far as I know, Mooncat does not offer plain jellies, so you cannot go to them for that. Turning to thermals, when we do that calculation, we come out to $1.50 per milliliter. That is quite expensive, but I will say in their favor, many brands do have a more expensive thermal. And part of that is that because it has a shelf life, it is a riskier investment for a business, but it is also a riskier investment for you as a polish user. I tend to only have a limited number of thermal polishes in my collection at a time because I'm aware that their thermal properties will fade and cease to operate over time. So eventually I will end up with a nail polish that is a single color, and I will not be able to predict what that color will be. It could be horrendous. I have thrown out the ends of a couple of thermal polishes because they dyed in a color I knew I would never wear. In fairness, there was probably only a couple of manicures left in the bottle at the time, so I didn't really feel like I had missed out. And finally, their other specialty finishes that are not thermals are either $1.14 per milliliter or $1.32 per milliliter. So depending on the product, this could be more expensive than Mooncat. This is also possibly more expensive than Holo Taco. The next polish I want to talk about is by Dany Vianna. I don't happen to own any Dany Vianna nail polish, but I did find the size of their bottles on the Hella Handmade Creations website. I could not find their bottle size on their own website, so I did have to go elsewhere for that information. And on their website, they do have a few outliers, but for the most part, it seems that they sell a regular bottle of nail polish for $14 USD. There are a few there that cost $10.50, so we'll include that as well. What makes a bottle $14 versus $10.50? I could not tell you. I didn't see any particular pattern to what costs what. In some cases, it was a topper that was the less expensive option, but not universally. There were some specialty finishes, some standalone polishes that were also $10.50. So when we put that into our calculation, we end up with 95 cents per milliliter for the less expensive bottles and 127 per milliliter for the more expensive bottles. So if you can get things for that lower price, that certainly seems very reasonable, but you are paying a premium for those more expensive bottles. And finally, Phoenix nail polish. Now, for me to purchase Phoenix polish, I would need to go to a stockist. In this case, I am using Color for Nails again. And I hope it's understood that whenever you go to a stockist, there is a markup because the stockist themselves needs to make some money from the sale. But I wanted to include something like this so that people could understand how this affects their polish prices, because there are brands like this that some of us cannot get but for a stockist. Another example from the other video is Lacquers. I can only buy Lacquers from a stockist. So I see two different prices on the website. The first price is $12, and as far as I can tell, those ones are plain jellies. I don't think they're creams looking at them, but if I'm incorrect and some of them are creams, I apologize. And the other price is $15 USD for specialty finishes. Now here's the kicker. It is a 10 milliliter bottle. So when we put these into the formula, we come out with 130 per milliliter for the plain jellies, and for the specialty finishes, we come to 150 per milliliter. So those are both pretty high prices for what they are. But I would bet that if I were closer geographically to the maker and I didn't have to, ship these such long distances, this would not be the case. And for our summary, let's start with the plain creams and jellies again. For Clionadh, I have included only the prices directly from their own website. Their creams are 80 cents per milliliter. Next is ILNP with a very reasonable 83 cents per milliliter. Next is Holo Taco at $1 per milliliter. Following that is Mooncat at $1.08 per milliliter. Next is Cirque at $1.14 per milliliter. And the most expensive being Phoenix at $1.30 per milliliter. So with this set of brands, I feel like we have a clear delineation between ILNP and Clionadh and the other brands. I honestly thought the differences between these more boutique brands and the more affordable brands was going to be larger. And I will say that of the brands listed, I do feel like a lot of them put effort into making sure you don't have to do too many coats of any given polish. A lot of them try to give you a solid color in 2 coats. I feel like jellies stand out here because they aren't necessarily made to be opaque. Not all of these brands offer jellies. The ones that stand out to me are ILNP, Cirque, and Phoenix seems to have a few. Next, we're going to discuss magnetics. This might seem like a weird second category, but a surprising number of brands actually have a separate price category for their magnetics. As a bystander, I assume this is because magnetic pigment is more expensive, but I don't really know. How I ordered this list hopefully will make some sense, but I had to make concessions to the fact that some brands had multiple prices. So starting with ILNP. So despite ILNP having a higher price point for their magnetics, it is still very affordable at $104 per milliliter. At exactly the same price point is Clionadh at $104 per milliliter. Next is Emily Damali at either $1 or $108 per milliliter. Because Emily Damali has 4 price points on their bottles, it might be important to know that these 2 prices are the 2 higher prices. So like most brands, the magnetics are amongst their most expensive polishes. But compared to other brands, it's still a pretty good price. Next is Holo Taco at $125 per milliliter. So you can see once more, there has been a little jump in price. My only Holo Taco happens to be a magnetic, and I've been very satisfied. It's quite opaque, it's sensitive to the magnet, it doesn't stain, but I have heard others issue complaints about different magnetics from Holo Taco. Next is by Dany Vianna at $127 per milliliter or 95 cents per milliliter. It may seem unfair to list the higher price first, but the vast majority of their magnetics are listed at the $127 price, and only a handful are offered at the lower price. Next is Cirque at $132 per milliliter. In the case of Cirque, those are not the only polishes listed at that price point, but all of their magnetics happen to be in that price point. And barely different is Mooncat, who offer their magnetics at $133 per milliliter. And ending the magnetics list is Phoenix at $150 per milliliter. Once again, I feel like there is a clear distinction where the price of these polishes jumps suddenly. Next, we'll be looking at thermals. Not every brand sells thermals, so this is a bit of a shorter list. You'll notice I put a star next to Holo Taco. This is because they have offered thermals in the past, but they do not currently have any in stock. For that reason, I thought it was plausible they might offer more in the future. So starting the list is Emily Damali. They offer their thermals at 3 price points, and that will range anywhere from 92 cents per milliliter up to $1.08 per milliliter. Next is Holo Taco at $125 per milliliter. Then we're returning to by Dany Vianna, and I've done her a little bit dirty. Her thermals are split pretty evenly between the 2 price points, but I was lazy and didn't want to have to reorder those, so I left them like this. But unlike the previous category where there was one price was much more representative, that's not so much true here. So I feel like it's arguable that I could have put Dany Vianna before Holo Taco, but I will leave that to your discretion where you feel like they belong. Next is Mooncat at $133 per milliliter. And our most expensive offering comes from Cirque at $150 per milliliter. So once again, there feels like a delineation between the more affordable brand and all of the what I think of as more like boutique brands. Depending on which price point you were able to capture from Dany Vianna, you could put her into one or the other of those categories. Next, we're going to talk about toppers. Mostly we have this category because of Holo Taco, who has an entirely separate price category for toppers. Most of these brands do sell toppers. However, their prices are variable, so it's not really worth talking about them as a separate category. For most polish makers, I have wrapped the toppers into what's coming up next, which is specialty finishes. The one exception I have made besides Holo Taco is ILNP, whose toppers are all the same price. And I did that so that there is some sort of point of comparison for Holo Taco's toppers. So toppers from ILNP are 83 cents per milliliter, and Holo Taco offers toppers for 108 per milliliter. And finally, we have made it to specialty finishes, which basically means anything we haven't previously covered, and toppers for most of the brands that are not Holo Taco. So Holo Taco excludes their toppers here, and everyone else includes their toppers here. Vindicated once more is ILNP at 83 cents per milliliter. So if anyone was worried when we started this little adventure that this was just ILNP hatred, absolutely not. Next is Clionadh at 87 cents per milliliter, or 104 per milliliter. Next up is Emily Damali, which has 4 different price points, and those range anywhere from 83 cents per milliliter up to 108 per milliliter. Next up is Garden Path Lacquer, whose bottles come out to 104 per milliliter or 106 per milliliter. I placed Emily Damali first because I felt their lower price was much lower, even though their higher price was slightly over Garden Path. Next comes Holo Taco at 117 per milliliter. After that, we have Mooncat, who sells for either 117 per milliliter or 125 per milliliter. Next is by Dany Vianna. That sells for either 95 cents per milliliter or 127 per milliliter. I could see some arguing this should have come before Mooncat, but I will leave that up to you. I felt that most of their bottles were 127, which is what put them here, but depending on what you purchase, it could be the better price of 95 cents. Next is Cirque Colors, and for a specialty finish or a topper, you're either going to pay 114 per milliliter or 132 per milliliter. And just a reminder, this excludes thermals and magnetics. And finally, Phoenix at 150 per milliliter. With this category, I don't think we have the huge jumps that we did with the other categories. Here I feel like it's more of a gentle gradation where there's more overlaps and clustering. Hopefully, I have properly represented that gradual rising as the prices change. So I know I said that I would have a giant summary at the end of this video. I lied. As it turned out, this video is so long and I need to end it now because basically I'm running out of time and I need to export so that I can post it. So what I will do instead is I will make a third part and the summary will be there. So sorry that I keep baiting you with this and then keep adding extra parts, but as it turns out, I talk too much. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. Up to 108 cents.